welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. I am a full-time stay-at-home mom, part-time bookseller, all-the-time reader living and working in Eastern North Carolina. And today we are going to be continuing my very large November wrap-up. So in the month of November, I read 31 books. I have already wrapped up what I read for Indigathon earlier this week. I will link it down below. This is part 2, and it is everything I read for Nonfiction November. My Nonfiction November reading was both physical and audiobook. So I ended up reading 11 nonfiction books in the month of November. So let's get started. A lot of these I've already talked about in Friday Reads videos, so I'm not going to be super detailed about those. First book I read, actually the first book I read this month, was Intimations by Zadie Smith. This is a very small, slim novel, or it's not a novel, small, slim essay collection that she wrote back at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Zadie Smith is a British author living in the US, and so this is mostly about her time in New York City in like April-ish. I gave it 5 stars. It was excellent. Highly recommend it on audio. The next thing I read was Shit Actually by Lindy West. This is the latest collection from Lindy West. This is all about movies, and specifically the title comes from, sorry if you can hear my older toddler building things in the other room as they fall over. So the title of this collection comes from her essay about Love Actually and how it is actually shit, which I totally agree with. I listened to this collection in the morning on election day here in the United States. So I'm going to be honest, I remember enjoying it. I know I talked more in detail about it the last time I talked about it. But mostly I just spent that day in an anxious state and needed something in the background to keep me distracted. So I listened to that while I did the puzzle, and it was hilarious. And actually there's an essay in there about the Santa Claus, which is my favorite Christmas movie, and I will be making my children watch it later. Probably not today, but this holiday season. So that was amusing to me, and I will still watch it. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was really good. It's my first Lindy West. She narrates the audio herself, and I think it definitely benefits from that. I also listened to The Erratics by Vicky Lavro Hardy. I can't read my own writing. This is her memoir about not caring for her aging parents, but going back to Canada. She moved to Australia and won the Stella Prize last year in Australia. And this book was just published here in the US, but she goes back to Canada to deal with the fact that her aging parents cannot care for themselves, but also her mother had disowned her and her sister many, many, many years prior. Her children have never met their grandparents. But she goes back because her mother has fallen and broken a hip, and so they can finally get into the house to check on her father and deal with all the lies and craziness her mother has been spinning around them. Her mother, I don't think she ever says exactly what her mother's mental illness is, but she definitely has something that could be diagnosed, and her father has enabled her in that their entire lives. So it was really good. It was a little properly upsetting because she's dealing with all sorts of the issues that you anticipate having to deal with aging parents, compounded by the fact that she's on another continent and she has such this crazy, strange relationship with them. It was very well written. She narrates her audiobook. I enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5 stars. Also read Love is an Ex-Country by Rhonda Girard. This is a advanced reader copy from Catapult. It comes out in February. It is about Girard's, it's her memoir. It is a collection of essays and recollections framed in this road trip that she took across the United States. Girard is a professor in California, and she is Arab American. Her family immigrated when she was a child. She was actually born in the US, And she grew up in Connecticut in a really rough, abusive household, escaped that by getting into an abusive marriage. There is coerced pregnancy, which was hard to read about, but she's very straightforward in the fact that she loves her child now, and she has dealt with the fact that she did not want the child until he was born. She's also the professor who, back when Barbara Bush died, called her out on Twitter and got tons and tons and tons of pushback. I remember that happening. I had forgotten about it until I read this. So her essay about that specifically happening was fascinating. So it is not an easy read, but it is a very interesting read. She deals with a lot of things that Americans who are not immigrants, first generation immigrants, not from the Arab part of the world, would not have experienced. So she talks about not having really a homeland because her mother is Egyptian but her father is from Palestine. Her sister lives on the West Bank, and all of that, the annexing of the Arab land for Israel, and it's very complicated. And getting a perspective that's not a Zionist perspective, especially here in the southern U.S., where I live in a red state and conservatives are very into we must protect the nation of Israel. Regardless of your opinions on that, I think it is important to see things from the perspective of the people who are being harmed by those decisions. So it was very good. I gave it 4 stars. It was a rough read, but it was a good read. Lots of trigger warnings, but it was a good read. And then I read a book for which there aren't any trigger warnings. She Come By It Natural, Dolly Parton and the Women Who Lived Her Songs by Sarah Smarsh. This was a 5-star read. I actually listened to the audiobook. I got the audio from the library, but this is a personalized copy I got from the Raven bookstore. It is an excellent, slim little book. It is a collection of articles that Smarsh wrote for a print magazine, and then they were collected into this book all about Dolly Parton. And I finished this, and right after I finished this, the news came out that Dolly Parton had been quietly funding vaccine research to get a vaccine for the coronavirus. So, Dolly Parton is a national treasure. I grew up in western North Carolina, and the big fire that wiped out a huge section of Gatlinburg, Tennessee, where Parton is from, and where Parton spent lots of money helping people recover. That fire also impacted my part of where I grew up. My mom is a teacher in right at the base of some mountains, and they could not have school because of all the smoke. So what the work that Dolly Parton has done is very relevant to my part of the world. And even though I'm not a huge country music Dolly Parton fan, because I was a teenager in the early 2000s and we were anti-country. We loved the Dixie Chicks, and then they were run out of country music, and then we were like, well, forget country then. So I really enjoyed this, and I enjoyed learning a lot more about Dolly Parton. Another 5-star read that I ended up actually listening to the audiobook for was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is a memoir that Chanel wrote specifically about her experience as a sexual assault victim and a sexual assault survivor, and taking her would-be rapist to court. We all know the name of the man who assaulted her, but he is the only name that she actually gives in the book. Everyone else is given a title or a character, so I'm not going to name the assault person. But this was so good. I listened to it on audio because I knew it was going to be a really tough read, and I thought, rightfully rightfully so, that it would be easier for me to get through it by listening to it instead of reading it physically. Highly recommend it. It is one of my top memoirs I have ever read. Chanel Miller is an incredible writer. Her victim impact statement that she wrote before she wrote this book, and which is included in this book, is so powerful. There's a reason it was shared around the world, and I cannot wait to see what she does next. She says in here that she is a writer and she would have been writing anyway. This is just what she ended up writing about first. And I can't wait to see what else she does, because I think long after we forget the name of her abuser, we will remember Chanel Miller. I read The Lazy Genius Way by Kendra Adachi. It is an audiobook that I got from the library. Kendra Adachi does the Lazy Genius podcast, and which I've been listening to for quite a while. She is actually from the middle of North Carolina, so it's kind of cool that this book has gotten so much buzz. It is all about finding ways in your life, especially, not specifically if you are a mother or a woman, but it is geared towards that. But anybody who has to manage their life or manage a household, or manage time, manage a family, about ways to do that with the least amount of mental effort. I really enjoyed it. I want a physical copy. I enjoyed the audio, but I really would like a physical copy to go back through and like mark some of the steps that she gives. Like I said, I listen to her podcast. Kendra's voice is just very calming for me. So it was actually an Okra pick here in the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance, which was really cool. And yeah, I would like a physical copy. I gave it 4 stars. It was really fun. I also read Milltown Reckoning with What Remains by Carrie Arsenal. This is the ARC copy that I received from St. Martin's Press, but I actually ended up listening to it on audio because Libro FM provided it for booksellers. And it is about the mill town that Arsenal grew up in Maine, and looking at what is happening to these very rural areas that rely on things like mills, or it's not like coal mining, but there are a lot of environmental impact discussions. There's a lot of discussions about water. A water bottling company comes in and wants to start a plant there, and she is grown up and move away, but she comes back to help fight against that. But a lot of it deals with like her father dies from cancer, and they start reckoning with all of the cancer, like the high rate of cancer in the area. So you learn a lot about environmental impacts, you learn a lot about carcinogens, so it was a very educational read. It was a heavy read. It was a little bit of a like the part of the world that's voted for Trump and why they vote for Trump, which yes, but I feel like we've had a lot of that lately, and I am glad that we are maybe finding new ways to frame the real problems that we have in rural America without referencing the racist in power. So I gave it 3 stars. It was a good, solid, like, nonfiction memoir. Another memoir I read was The Dragon, the Giant, the Woman by Wyatt Moore. I gave this 5 stars. It is shortlisted for the Reading Women Nonfiction Prize, and I had not read it yet, but Libro FM had provided it for booksellers, so I downloaded it and listened to it. It is very powerful. It is all about her family and how they came to the United States, how they escaped revolution in Liberia and came to the U.S. And so it deals with the first section is all about when she was 5 and running from the rebels. And then the next section is about when she was an adult living in the US and wanting to go back to understand, because she grew up as a Black woman in America, but she was an immigrant from Africa. And so all of the stuff that she was experiencing, her parents couldn't really relate to because they had not grown up in a white supremacist society. And all of her Black friends who are descendants of enslaved peoples, dealing with the fact that she can't relate to that part because she has a country that she came from. So it was a lot. It's very complex. It's about identity. It's about escape. But the dragon is what she called the man who was leading the revolution in her country. The giant is what she called her grandfather. And the woman is her grandmother, her mother. The last section of the book is written in first person as memory, but it is her mother's perspective, because her mother was a student on a Fulbright scholarship in the United States when they had to flee from the rebels. And it's about her trying to find find out if the family is okay, and then trying to find a way to go get them. So it was very powerful, very beautiful book. Highly, highly, highly recommend it. Highly recommend the audio. She does not narrate it herself because it was recorded during COVID, and so she was unable to do that. But she does introduce the book, and the woman that they do have narrate it is fantastic. Another arc that I read is Made in China by Amelia Pang, A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods. This is an arc that comes out in February from Algonquin, and it is about the slave labor camps in China and how cheap consumer goods and luxury goods coming out of China, you might not even realize that they are being outsourced to these camps. So it is framed by the story of Sun Yi. He is a prisoner in a camp, and he was imprisoned because he practices a form of meditation that the Chinese government decided was unacceptable and outlawed, and so he was involved in activism, and the Chinese government was like, no. And so they imprison him multiple times, and then he gets sent to this really terrible prison camp, and he ends up being able to write a letter and he writes a bunch of letters and he sneaks them into the packages that he is creating. He was responsible for helping to manufacture these decorative Halloween decorations, these decorative gravestones. And in 2012, a woman in Oregon goes and opens a package that she bought from Kmart and finds one of his letters. And so it starts there, and then Pang goes back and explains how Sun Yi ended up in this situation, the history of the camps, it was just horrible to read about. It made me very aware of where what I'm buying is coming from. Trying to be very careful. We were already trying to be careful of that, and now we're like really dialed in on it because it's very top of mind for me right now because I just read this book. It takes you all the way through Sun's experience, and there is a resolution to his story, which is nice to find. And then what I really appreciated is at the end, Pang gives some action points that we individual consumers can do, and ways we can pressure the government, ways we can pressure manufacturers to push back and get these camps abolished. Because since the time that Sun Yi was in the prison camps, they have been renamed from prison forced labor to drug rehabilitation centers, but they are the same. And I highly recommend reading it. I gave it 4 stars. I will say serious content warnings for descriptions of torture, descriptions of what is done to these people. Like, it was very hard to read, but it's a very powerful book, and I think very important. I kind of hate the cover, but it's okay. So that this will be out in February, so go ahead and get it on your radars now. And then the last book that I read, ironically, I listened to the audiobook of Clutter In Untidy History by Jennifer Howard. This is another audiobook that was provided by Libro FM. I gave it 3 stars. It is all about all of this clutter and all the stuff that we have, especially focused on American consumerism. Howard had to clean out her mother's home after her mother developed dementia and had to be moved into care. And so her mother was Howard gives different terms for hoarder, because hoarder can be a triggering and upsetting, like, derogatory term. And so using these other terms helps frame people's need to accumulate things in a more of a mental health capacity. But a collector, I think, is one of the things that she called it. And so she goes through it. She traces it from the Victorian era to now, and forward. What happens to our stuff as we clean out? And she talks about the Container Store and how we just really want to organize all of our things. And she talks about Marie Kondo and decluttering. But she doesn't really give you any action points, which is what I was looking for. It was good. I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't a bad read. It was an interesting read. I listened to it while cleaning, so it really inspired me to keep cleaning. Airplane. It's a slim volume. It was a short audio. So it was more like a long form essay than a book. But that's okay. I think it does a good job of framing where we are right now in our relation to things. And if you're someone who's trying to push back against consumerism, it's another good reminder that you don't have to have everything all the time. And I appreciated it. Okay, so those are the 11 nonfiction books that I read in November. If you made it all the way through this, let me know down below what you read in November. What were your favorite reads? Did you read any nonfiction? Do you have any nonfiction recommendations, especially things that came out in the last, this year? I would love to hear them. Otherwise, I am going to go deal with my children. This is coming out as part of Vlogmas, so stay tuned for more videos from me, and I will talk to you soon. Comment, subscribe. Bye, y'all.